I am not a teacher. I did teach some lessons while I was doing my undergraduate degree, but that's far from being a classroom teacher. And when I see clips like this, and images like this,
hovered over me and with his left hand whammed me.
The assault left him with a severe black eye.
or hear actor recreated audio like this,
I've had concussion from an incident. I've also been pushed and fallen backwards. I'll go home, and even when I'm in bed, I'll be thinking about what happened, or what might happen tomorrow. I'm still having nightmares after an incident, and that's an ongoing thing.
Twitter polls like this, even semi-official surveys like this. I'm glad I took the sports coaching degree and didn't take the PE teaching degree. Although I got my fair share of abuse coaching football and especially refereeing football, it's nothing to the abuse I've seen reported recently for teachers inside of schools. Some people are saying teachers should grow up when it comes to the verbal abuse, but most people don't go to work expecting to be sworn at, insulted or shouted at. Nor do people go to work worrying about being hit with a chair or having things flung across the room at them. That seems to be a unique perk of being a classroom teacher. Bring back the cane, bring back physical punishment, some people may argue. No, that's just not a good idea for lots of different reasons, but punishment or behaviour management is certainly at the centre of this issue. When I first saw a lot of these images circulating around online, it reminded me of situations when I was at school. A local math teacher took a student to France without telling her parents that they were going to France.
The 30-year-old and the 15-year-old pupil at the school where Forrest taught in the UK.
That actually triggered a international manhunt for the two of them because obviously the parents wanted to know where their child was and the teacher had taken them to France. Male teachers take advantage of female students, but female teachers also take advantage of male students. The whole dynamic of teacher and students is filled with moral and ethical situations, which is kind of what the safeguarding paperwork is for. But I don't know what the paperwork looks like for being hit in the face by a student or a chair in the back of the head by a student. I'm talking about this as an interested researcher, but also concerned person of society. If children are verbally and physically assaulting more teachers in school, also assaulting other pupils for that matter, I do worry what will happen if that trend continues to rise and what's going to happen in social environments. I don't think it's going to turn into a civil war anytime soon, but it does make the streets sound far less safe. It does sound like if you say the wrong thing, you are at risk of being verbally or physically assaulted far more often. But maybe that's already happening and we're already seeing that. Maybe children are seeing what the adults are already doing in social situations, whether it's online or in person, and then they are just replicating that inside of school. There are multiple potential causes here, but it's certainly something worth thinking about. Now, I like data, so I like to know what the data is suggesting or how you could interpret the data to work out what's going on and just to see if any research supports what claims are being made. So I went looking for numbers about teacher assaults inside of school. Being from England, I looked at the stats in England. Although a much smaller sample size than the US, it firstly is relevant to me because I'm in England, but also it's easier because I know where the data can be found. Most articles I've seen online use different percentages and different numbers from a variety of surveys, but because for whatever reason journalists are rarely transparent with their sources, going to find the sources is very difficult. So off to the government website I go to create my own custom table from the data that they have. Now I did export the data and played around with it inside of Excel, but my editor likes to actually show the data in a way that makes more sense and it looks pretty. So this is the data. Hopefully you can see the data shows a huge increase. For a quick explanation of the data, obviously during COVID, the pandemic, with the lockdowns, the school doesn't have data about exclusions or suspensions, so there's no data to use. And before the pandemic, the suspension and exclusion data was far more narrow, so you couldn't use it for this use case at least. And I'm not entirely sure what happened in the spring of 21-22 because the numbers look quite low, and if I do find out, then my editor can put something on screen. But you can see in the autumn of 22-23, the most recent term that's got the data for, there is a huge increase. Up by 7,000 plus physical assaults on pupils and adults in just one term. Up by 4,000 plus verbal assaults on pupils in one term. And up by 17 plus thousand verbal assaults on adults in one term. Can we just think about that for a second? 17 plus thousand more verbal assaults in one term. That's close to a 50% increase in verbal assaults for just that term. And some politicians why teachers are leaving or why we're not getting many teachers in. Now, they were just suspensions, temporary exclusions. For those being excluded, asked to leave the school and go to another school. Now you can see this data, you can obviously see a trend. Yes, there are limitations with all of this data, but when you look at it, you can see the trend, and the amount of verbal abuse on adults is crazy. In 2 years, we more than doubled the exclusion rates, the permanent exclusion rates for verbal assault cases. Maybe schools are suspending and excluding students more. Or maybe the children aren't behaving the way we would expect them to in school or just general society. There's probably a bit of both in there, but I certainly lean more towards the poor behaviour. Abuse is abuse and should be punished. There should be consequences. There is outside of school, it's prison. If we don't punish those that abuse other people's in some way, what's going to stop them from doing it next time? Me being a little nosy, I went to have a look at the teacher age and see if there was any correlation with the data. I did look at other numbers, but this one piqued my interest the most. Teachers seem to be getting older, in the age bracket of around 30 to 50. I think probably because new teachers are in that age bracket, 30 to 50. Now, that in itself doesn't necessarily mean anything significant. But with technology playing such a huge role in children's lives and our lives as well, I'm not entirely sure how well those teachers would be able to relate to the students' lives because they are so drastically different. And it isn't like teachers have loads of spare time to be going and looking up TikTok trends or the most recent addition to ChatGPT to see what's going on. I'm not even sure teachers have enough time to do the job that they're asked to do already, let alone stuff on top. Teachers' workload is a huge discussion point, and as you can see by the data, it is one of their biggest concerns. So if the teachers say something that the children have learned through online in some way that could be offensive or belittling or goes against what they expect as a social norm, the teacher could unintentionally offend, frustrate, or trigger poor behaviour from the student, but the teacher didn't know that they were the reason, they were the trigger point. Or children could be replicating what they've seen online and the teacher not understand or not grasp what's really going on, what the behind the scenes motives are, because the teacher isn't familiar with online trends. My mum shared a perfect example of this a couple of months back. She was leaving the shops, and outside of the shops there were 3 boys, 2 of them fighting, one of them recording the fight. Now, my mum isn't tall, big, or strong by any means and normally keeps to herself, but seeing a fight, obviously you're going to react. So she walked over and started shouting at them fighting. Her intention was to help the boy that looked like was going to be beaten up because they were losing the fight. And she said to them that someone else watching had called the police, so they ran off laughing. The boy that was pretending to be beaten said, "Oh no, it's all fake, don't worry about it." He tried to briefly explain that they were just looking for good people to see if they would react. Now, my mum explained this to me over dinner and was just really confused because she doesn't understand what's going on. Me, being online, I'm familiar with this sort of content. I don't like it or agree with it, but I'm familiar with it, so I understand what it was that they were trying to do, what they were trying to replicate. But if teachers, parents, adults don't see that stuff, they may not understand it, so they may not understand the behaviours that the pupils are doing either in school or outside of school. And there are loads of other instances where children may behave in a way that is seen online and the adult or parent or teacher doesn't understand the reason why they're behaving like that because it's not how they did when they were younger. Now, I'm not saying teachers need to follow all the online trends or keep up to date with technology and what's going on in society with TikTok and the rest of it, no. But it does bring into question the reasons behind the behaviour and trying to probe out what's going on, which could either help with understanding why the behaviour happened to help educate, so learning opportunities there, but also places to put policies to try and prevent the behaviour from happening in the first place. Now, that doesn't explain the increased level of assaults, but that may explain why there were so many more verbal assaults for adults than pupils. Adults not understanding or necessarily understanding the way that children behave. But that's just a hypothesis or a suggestion, as it were. In my search to understand some of these numbers a little bit more, I had a look at one of the National Teacher Surveys from 2023. Now, there are lots of worrying numbers in that survey, but there are a few that stuck out to me. 77% of teachers struggle day to day with students not being able to follow simple rules. 47% struggle day to day with swearing and verbal abuse in class. 27% struggle day to day with violence between pupils, and 16% struggle day to day with issues about pupils abusing adults. 16%. That is far too high for day to day, and that's like 1.5 teachers. I know you can't have half a teacher, but that's a lot of teachers. Over the past year, 47% of teachers were subject to verbal abuse by pupils, and 28% by parents or carers. So it's not just the children. 19% of teachers were subject to threats of physical assault by pupils, and 14% were actually assaulted by pupils. But more worrying to me is that 41% of teachers said that the school didn't deal with the behaviour issue sufficiently. So they didn't deal with the abuse from the parent, carer or pupil in a way that was satisfactory. If the school doesn't support the teacher either before, during or after whatever the incident is, and the teacher can't really defend themselves because then they are at risk of, well, losing their job or being found of assaulting a pupil, what in the world are teachers meant to do? Looking at the biggest concerns from teachers in England at least, workload is right up there at the top. 82% worrying about workload, but 62% worry about pupils' poor behaviour. That is second on the list, second behind school inspection and pay. Behaviour in schools is an issue, you can see that by the clips. But this data shows that verbal and physical assaults are on the rise, which means it's getting worse. And if 74% of teachers are considering quitting their jobs and 69% quitting the profession, will it be up to the internet to educate children? I love online education and do support much of what it does, but there are lots of dangers, lots of limitations, and loads of things to sort out before we can even consider replacing school with online education. Educating teachers about these sorts of things sounds like a great idea, but again, there's resources, there's money, there's time that is limiting. There aren't many sectors in the world at the moment that are thriving. I would also say people interaction is kind of important, arguably vital for the species survival. So replacing school with the internet I don't think is a solution, and I don't have any particular answers. I have lots of suggestions and ideas from the research I've done, but I don't have expertise in this area. This isn't my area of expertise, so I'm going to leave that to the professionals that work with schools and behaviour policies inside of schools. But I am interested to hear your thoughts on behaviour in school. Leave them in the comment section below, and I did recently discuss a video about suspensions and exclusions and the journalism around it, so if that's something that interests you, click on this video over here.